three main speakers, and then we've got Sean's gonna, who's a landowner in the area, is gonna talk a couple of minutes. I'm glad we were able to get somebody else who can talk about things as well. So Tracy Emerson is an agriculture and natural resources agent with Cooperative Extension Service out of Oldham County. Derek Shade is a staff engineer with Oldham County Fiscal Court's Engineering Department. And I am Becca Truman. I'm a watershed coordinator. I also work out of the engineering department for Oldham County Fiscal Court. And I specifically am a watershed coordinator for Curry's Fork watershed. Some of what we do is very specific to Curry's Fork, but workshops like this are open to anyone and you know, applicable to really anyone with a stream on their property and also just interested in streams. So I said I was getting a little ahead of myself. So I wanted to just remind everybody this is going to be recorded. I'm hoping to, you know, have this publicly available after. You're welcome to ask questions in the chat, but also if you want to wait until the end, we'll have times for questions as well at the end of the presentation. But if you have a burning question, you think you're going to forget it, feel free to enter it in the chat and we'll get to that as well. Just reminder to keep yourself muted during the presentation, and then when we have time to have questions and a discussion, feel free to unmute yourself. It would be great to get input from this group. There's resources available so normally if we were in person, you'd get like a whole packet to take home. So there's a bunch of resources available in a Google Drive folder. I'll kind of follow up after this with a reminder. We're gonna keep adding to that as applicable resources become available and we find them. If Google Drive doesn't work for you or you prefer like a printed packet, just reach out and let us know. And because this is funded from a grant, we need to get match for a grant, which means we need to, and we can account for that match based on the time of your time here on in this workshop. So if you can go ahead and just type your name in the chat now, and that'll help me track that match, which will really be helpful for our grant. So I'll give everybody a second to do that now. And it looks like we have some more participants. I only can see so much here, so welcome if you didn't hear that yet. And you can see just a few things to know on the slide here, and go ahead and type your name in the chat now. Okay, everybody good, I think. Let's see. So it's early, Saturday morning, it's a little chilly out, so kind of get us warmed up here. So it'd be really good to just sort of get a sense from this group, what is your primary motivation for attending this workshop? And I'm gonna launch a poll. I haven't done this yet. See how it goes. So are you seeing a poll on your screens? I think, cool. The teacher's like, yep, appreciate it. And then are you seeing one question or two? Two, okay. I did try to split this up. I messed that up, but it's okay. I'm glad we've got it on here. So I'll give a little bit more time. So yeah, so the first question is, what's your primary motivation for attending this workshop? Anywhere from you just want to be able to enjoy your stream more, and you know there may be some things that you can do to lead to that result, or you're actually noticing some real problems with your stream and you might want some advice on how to figure that out. And then let me go to the next one here. Okay. And then the other one is just thinking about how often do you spend time in and around water for recreation? I focused on the last 6 months just because we're in a very kind of before and after COVID time way we're thinking. So not necessarily needing to get the past 10 years of your life, but you know, based on thinking about where most people are, have been over the past few months, it'd be great to think about that as well. And I'll wait just a few more seconds. I can see the results coming in, so I just want to give people a little bit of time for that. All right, I think we're okay. Hopefully that made sense. I'm gonna end it and I can share the results. Okay, great. Let's see if I can expand this so you guys can see that. All right, so we've got most people here have a concern for property loss and erosion, which is completely what we expected. And generally when, you know, nothing's important until you have a problem, just because that's how life goes. We don't always have the capacity to be proactive. So that's completely understandable and good to know. Curious about the other, I'm sure there's some things in there I missed. So feel free to type in the chat if you were one of those other people. It'd be good to, if you're comfortable doing that, get your thoughts. And once every couple of months, we're actually spread out quite a bit here between, you know, not at all, that's understandable as well. It might not make sense, or maybe you have a stream in your backyard and it makes sense to go out to it every week or month or something. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing those and move on. Let's see if I can, hopefully that will save. Okay, where are we here? All right. So I think it's really important in presentations to kind of start with the take-home points, like what are we really trying to talk about here? And hopefully as we go through the presentation, that'll be well conveyed and explained more thoroughly. So just remember, streams provide essential services that are really important to support our quality of life. And the overall health of our streams is declining. I'm going to kind of cover this a little bit more. When we think about well-functioning streams, what they really need is they need space to move. So, you know, we think of that as our floodplain and a riparian buffer. So some type of vegetation securing our stream banks. And Tracy's going to get into this section here. And Derek's going to talk about stream health, as well as the fact that stream maintenance is the responsibility of the landowner. And kind of our big idea here is that creating a no-mow zone along your stream is really the simplest and most effective way to improve stream health. All right, so Sean, I've got you up here if you're ready. Sean is a landowner here in Oldham County, and I've been to his property once. This is his riparian buffer he's created. So I think it's important to not just hear from people like me and Derek and Tracy, but also people actually doing this with their property. And so Sean, I'll give you a couple minutes to chat if you're ready here. Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. So we bought our property about 5 years ago. And when we first moved here, you know, one of the main
Sean, you might want to take you might want to turn your video off. I think the bandwidth is not gonna. Let's try that and see.
Is this better?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So we moved in here about 5 years ago, and one of the main draws for us was that it had a year-round creek going through our property. Because I wanted to use it for irrigation, for garden, for trees and whatnot, kids to play in, etc. And when we first moved in, I mean, it was just grass all the way up to the creek bed. And in the beginning, there were a couple of really heavy storms when we first moved in, and we were noticing an extreme amount of erosion just right off the bat. And so I talked with a friend of ours that does waterway restoration, and so she came out and, you know, looked at everything and suggested all these things that we've been trying to do as time and money allows. And so one of the first things was we stopped mowing right up to the creek. You know, we let it grow out as not as much as we could, but something that was acceptable, I guess, to me and my wife. I wanted more, she wanted less, so we compromised. And so we've been letting it grow up, but I mean, we're still seeing a lot of erosion. I would say in the almost 5 years we've been here, we've lost several feet on each side in just 5 years. And we planted a ton of trees around. We've got willows, we've got river birch, along the creek in what we thought were key areas where we saw the erosion, and then as well as just trying to let it grow up and see what happens. Um, yeah. So I don't know if that's kind of the background that you wanted on where we are right now.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Anything else you wanna talk about?
Oh,
You're welcome.
as far as like what's going on upstream.
Well, okay, so I'll kind of intro this by saying so. Sean's property looks amazing. If you've driven on 22, you've seen it. Um, and Sean's also a very good example of within his property boundaries. He's basically said, I'm just going to let this area go. He has planted some things, but most of this is just native, like volunteer vegetation that comes in, and it looks really great. But he's a really good example of, even though he's doing something to be helpful, he's still noticing some problems. So it's the idea that it takes really everybody, along the stream to do something like this to really have those cumulative impacts. So I imagine this has helped with the erosion, but it hasn't um, totally negated, future erosion. So it's the idea that we're talking about, and we're going to really emphasize creating a riparian buffer, but that's not like the end all be all of solutions. It's sort of like, that's amazing that you can do that, but we don't want to tell you that's going to totally mean you're not going to have erosion in the future. So what happens upstream is really going to impact your property as well, and vice versa. What you do, he's probably benefited his neighbors by doing this, by keeping some of that erosion in place. So feel free to add something else to that, Sean, if you want, but if not, I think
Yeah.
this is great.
If you literally stand on our property line with our upstream neighbor, it is night and day. I mean, if you've driven down E2, you've probably seen our house. Everybody is always like, what are they building now? They're crazy. But that's us. We're right by the schools, East Oldham. And so right upstream, like our neighbor has done the complete opposite of what we are doing. Like he is literally sprayed and killed all the vegetation along his creek. And I was, what are you doing? this is not what you're supposed to be doing. But and so we have to deal with that. Not only just the water eroding his banks, but then when we first moved in, we had noticed him spraying. He walks around with a backpack sprayer on his 17 acres, and he will literally spray every weed on his 17 acres with his backpack sprayer. And so we noticed that he had been spraying, and then like a week later, all the crawdads and fish and frogs were dead in our. So that was concerning to us. But yeah, so upstream, that's what we're dealing with. And then just downstream, not adjacent to us, but the next property over, just recently they did the same thing on their property that our upstream neighbor did. And I'm like, what is going on, people? So yeah, that's kind of what we're dealing with. We have auxiliary kind of stream runoff from the schools that also puts in a lot of water during heavy rain events. So we're kind of trying to figure out how to mitigate that as well. So, which is, I've talked to Becca about trying to get the school to do a rain garden right there as well, to kind of try and help with that as well. So I don't know if there's anything else to add as of right now that I can think of.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate that. Hopefully, it kind of makes sense to people. If let me look at the chat for a second. And when you start to start to do things on your property, I think that's when you notice what other people are doing on their property sometimes, and saying, you know, man, I'm trying to benefit this area, and now somebody, you know, right upstream for me is doing something different that's making it harder for me. So that's kind of the idea. But thanks, Sean. I appreciate. I know you gotta get going to do some things, but I'll follow up with you after. Okay. All right. So now we're start thinking about these things. I wasn't sure if Sean was going to be able to make it, so I'm glad he was. So while we're kind of still getting started here, thinking about just getting us in the same mindset of where is our water on this planet. You know, we're all familiar with the water cycle, but we're probably most familiar with precipitation and then maybe runoff. It's really easy to forget that there's a lot of water under our feet, and also the role that trees play in transpiration, basically evaporation, but with trees, we notice that difference when we are around, you know, in a forest or even around a lot of trees. So water's everywhere. It's in different states of matter and in different locations throughout the planet. So more specifically, thinking about where is the Earth's water? I mean, we know we have a sense of in our mind of, you know, we don't have a whole lot of available water that we can actually drink and use, but just to remind us of how big of a difference that is. Now I'll just remind, this is from 1993, not to say it's a whole lot different now, but it could be, but this is more to have that kind of visual breakdown. Basically, we're looking at 2.5% fresh water on our whole planet. Of that, 1.2 is surface water, and of that 1.2, 0.49% is really what we're seeing in our rivers and streams and as surface waters. So it's really a very small amount, even though we see it all around us. So kind of keeping that in perspective. I'll show on the next slide. So groundwater is about 30% of that freshwater amount. So way more of the water that's freshwater is groundwater. And then, you know, a lot of that is glaciers and ice caps. Although, like I said, I don't know what those numbers are today. So stream. So what is a stream? By definition, a stream is a body of flowing water. And this is really the intersection between our groundwater and the surface. That's where our streams live. That's where we find them. And I'd mentioned that 30% in groundwater. So remembering that there's a lot of water under our feet at all times in our groundwater table, and it fits within all those different soil and sediment and gravel layers, and within the rocks, and all the way down to our bedrock, wherever it can fit. So just remembering there's a lot of water under our feet and all around us. Okay, and so what do streams do? Streams have a lot of, I mentioned, you know, streams provide a lot of ecosystem services for us. It's easy to kind of forget how important our streams are. Just kind of going left to right here, thinking about, well, they dissipate energy. This is really important for flood control, flooding, and having all of a sudden you might have water in your basement. This might have been, you know, talk to people in Oldham County where they moved into their house, and then, you know, 20 years later, all of a sudden it seems like they're in the floodplain. That wasn't the case 20 years ago. So streams help to disperse that huge amount of energy of that flowing water. So we're not receiving the huge, the flooding. They produce wetland products. So you can't have a wetland unless you have water at least some time of the year. And those are connected to streams somehow. They sequester sediment, contaminants, and nutrients. So this is where we're thinking about when we have pollution. So streams and really soil in general is doing a great job of filtering our pollution and connected with the vegetation that's often associated with streams and wetlands, that's specific to kind of vegetation that has roots and wet feet and needs to have wet feet. So there's water some time of the year, or maybe all throughout the year. But that really helps to filter not just typical pollution we think of as chemicals or anything, but also sediment, which is our number one pollutant in Kentucky. And sediment is really just our soil that's getting washed away, it's getting eroded away. Providing habitat, the riparian area that Tracy's going to emphasize is really like a unique area. It's a unique habitat, but the biodiversity within that seemingly small area is huge. Aesthetic services, recreation, that's a big reason people care about their streams. They want to fish, they want to boat, they want to bring their families out, or they just want to get in nature, which hopefully we're all able to do right now. And so they take all that water and they basically filter it and they put it back into the water system, right? And so sometimes that's a stream, sometimes that's a groundwater, but it's really, it's cleaner at that point, and that's a really important thing to remember. So I'm gonna take a minute, I'm gonna kind of be brief. I know we might be a little short on time. I did mention, if you haven't, some people came in sort of a couple minutes after 9. We're probably going to go a little bit after 10, but if you're really limited on time, not to worry, feel free to sign off, and we are going to record this and can send it out later. But there's some good things to cover, so I apologize if you really want it to be less than an hour, but we're going to try. So how are our streams changed? So a big emphasis of this discussion is talking about our streams look quite a bit different than they did 10, 20, 50 years ago. Streams naturally change, they naturally move, so that's a factor too, but a big part of that is that the landscape has changed, and the changing of the landscape is really connected to how our streams look. So as watershed coordinator, I can go to the stream and I can look at the stream itself, standing, with the stream in front of me, and try to look and see what's going on. But I don't get the whole picture unless I look upstream, unless I look throughout the landscape, throughout the entire watershed or the area of land that's feeding that stream. And there's a lot of ways I can go with this. I'm going to focus on urbanization or development and kind of the cycle of what happens and the factors that what happen. So what happens when you take, say, an area that's forested and, we need to put in a development, we need more room for people. So generally what happens is you remove the topsoil layer. That topsoil layer is, like I mentioned in the last slide, soil is has huge importance for filtering out pollution. And so when you remove the topsoil layer, you've reduced all that ability for that land to filter water, bring it into the groundwater table, clean it, send it out back to a stream, basically back into the system. So these are all connected. It's kind of a cycle, but they're all intertwined. So we're increasing impervious surface. Impervious surface is just land that it could be pavement, it could be rooftop, it could be your lawn. It's surface that the water just doesn't have the ability to infiltrate in. So pavement and parking lots are really the most obvious. But I mentioned lawns because oftentimes our lawns are really compacted. So you might see water, you might see it rain and the water basically pools or sheets off is a really common way that we notice that our lawns and our vegetative areas that we would hope would help to slow down that water really are not working well. Part of this process is like the removal, the reduction, and the alteration of our small waterways. So a big thing to keep in mind is we have less streams now because to do things like put in a development, those little like intermittent streams are often changed or altered, or there's a lot of waterways that we might not know of that can just be gone now. And what this does is that, so we have less streams and we're sending more water directly to the stream. So if you've been at your property and you have a stream in the backyard for a long time, you can probably attest to this. Our streams are receiving a lot more water, and this is all connected to this process of just reducing that infiltration capacity of our land upstream. mentioned talking about how streams help mitigate those forces. So when we have more water, naturally, we can imagine we're going to have a lot more force going down into our streams. And what this does is these forces kind of push against the stream banks and they eat away at them. So most of our erosion is really actually occurring directly from the stream. It's coming from the stream. We're also part of this is minimizing habitat for for wildlife, not just intuitively by have a development or a house here, but also along our streams. A lot of our streams, as Sean talked about. Oh, and he's got a picture right now. A lot of our streams that Sean talked about, and what you can see throughout the county is we have a lot of streams just mowed up right directly to the stream. So that reduces habitat and that riparian habitat as well. And kind of lastly here is we're increasing our pollutant load. So thinking about as a landowner, you want to fertilize maybe your lawn, you want to fertilize your garden, oils from our cars. So these are all things that kind of connect. This isn't placing blame. This is just sort of the reality that we're in, and important to be aware of that. Coming into a landscape, this is what happens. And so we're talking about streams, but it's really important to kind of take a step back and look at the cycle of what's happening. Okay, so just a quick history. And I talked about development in the last slide, but you could talk about other land, you could talk about agriculture, or different land uses as well. I'm not just saying that's the only thing happening, for sure. So in 1972, the Clean Water Act started, and this was to control pollution and the idea that we need safe and clean waterways. If I wasn't alive then, I can't attest to things in person. Maybe some of you can, but we had things like chemicals just going straight into our waterways, rivers on fire. So, so this was sort of the beginning of that big effort to say, let's try to protect our streams more and reduce all of the polluting that's happening. And this quality has been measured and tracked since this time. And I think this is my last slide, and then we'll go on. So kind of a state of the stream. So the idea was that we needed to take actions to protect our streams. And the reality is we really didn't do a great job. So we have a lot of unintended consequences to the way that that we're managing the land, and that results in waterways that really don't support those ecosystem services that I described. And the way that's measured in this, so our streams are impaired. That's a real term that's used when you're describing water quality, and they described by this by saying that we're seeing really high levels of bacteria that can come from not just agriculture, but failing septic systems, leaking sewers, animals like geese and deer are a big contributor to bacteria in our waterways. And then thinking about how this impacts wildlife, well, we're decreasing the oxygen levels in our waterways, and aquatic wildlife need to breathe too. So there's all these things happening, and oftentimes those oxygen levels are decreased because well, a few things. And one of the big things that's really important to convey is because our streams are warmer. So when you remove the shade from a stream, it's going to be warmer. That kind of is intuitive. So by doing things like mowing up to our streams, not having that riparian area, our streams are warmer and they have less oxygen in them. So this map right here, it's a little bit hard to see, but I just want to convey that most streams except for Harrods Creek, I think this is Harrods Creek, a big part of that. So the green is generally pretty good. The yellow is sort of in between, and then the red, which is Curry's Fork, which is what I work on, is impaired, meaning it has these big issues with bacteria and decreased oxygen and what we're talking about. So a lot of the streams in Oldham County are impaired. Most streams are impaired is the reality that we're in. If I showed you a map of Kentucky, every county in the whole state of Kentucky has impaired streams. Probably every county in the whole country has impaired streams. So this is really just kind of the state of where we're at with our streams, and really the emphasis that I'm going to move on now to have Tracy come in, that having the support of individual landowners who own the streams is really essential if we're going to sort of make headway here. All right, so I'm going to give it over to Tracy, and if you have any questions, like I said, as we go throughout, feel free to put those in the chat. And I'll mute myself.
All right, Becca, thank you. So we're going to move kind of into stream function and habitat, but I want you to notice that you're going to hear some key words and some key concepts repeated. You will have already heard Becca mention them, or maybe Sean mention them, and you'll probably hear Derek mention them too. So all of these things are important. I'm assuming you guys can hear me okay? Thanks, Darcy. Next slide, please, Becca. So first we want to talk about what are the key components of a healthy stream. A healthy stream should have floodplain access. A healthy stream should have meanders, which are simply the bends you see in the stream. We don't want a straight channel that looks like a water slide ride. A healthy stream needs to have pools and riffles. We want to have good in-stream habitat, and a healthy stream is also going to have a buffer zone. And we'll talk about each of these things. Next slide, Becca. So floodplain access, I think this is it makes me feel like this is a little bit counterintuitive, because normally when we say the word flood, people have a negative reaction. So they're thinking, I don't want to flood in my backyard, or I don't want my property to flood. But for a stream to be healthy, for it to function correctly, we want to see floodplains. It's something that allows overflow on both sides of the creek or the stream. And this helps slow the stream down. It reduces the risk of the soil on the inner banks of the stream from being eroded and undercut, so that you're going to have huge chunks of land falling into your stream. A floodplain is important to the stream's ecosystem, and it also actually minimizes human-related problems of flooding. So a floodplain is a natural area where water can naturally go over the edges of the bank. This is important. It's nature's way of holding the flood water that was later on going to recharge the stream and recharge our groundwater. Next slide, Becca. We also want to see meanders in the stream. This is a beautiful photo. When you have good floodplain access, you're going to have a stream that meanders or has bends in it. And the bends are important because it reduces the water speed. You don't want water shooting down a straight channel. That's when we have erosion occurring. This is definitely not what you want to see. Next, thank you. And before we talk about the in-stream habitat, I do want to mention riffles and pools. A riffle is a place where you have a big rock or a big log in the water that is, you have water moving fast against that. Those objects actually break the water's surface and help put oxygen back into the water. So that's a way of nature aerating the water, and oxygen is important to the aquatic life you've got there. And then pools are simply kind of what they sound like. A pool is when the water is hitting a big rock or a big log with force and crashing down on the other side. It carves out a pool over time, and that's important for some of our aquatic life too. Also want to say that, logs in a stream are not a bad thing. Fallen logs create part of the habitat that we want to see. And leaf mat is also important for the habitat we want to see. Now, on the flip side, I don't want you to think that, or I don't want this to mean that you can go dump all of your yard leaves, all the leaves you've cleaned from your yard. You don't want to dump those in the stream in an attempt to create this habitat, because that could choke the stream or block it and cause different issues. So a healthy stream should have a buffer zone. When I first started thinking about buffer zones several years back, planning for a program like this, I would refer to a buffer zone as being an area where the land and water meet. But a buffer zone is actually more than that. A buffer zone needs to have the right type of vegetation to make it a buffer zone. You want to see a mix of trees and shrubs and grasses. We want to see good vegetative cover. And I do want to note too, a lot of times we see these areas where streams or where creeks and land meet being in people's backyards or through the front of their property, whatever the case is. And over time, those are residences, right? So they have lawn grasses. And sometimes we also have shade. And so any of you who are yard lovers will know that our cool season grasses that we have for yards here, fescues, bluegrasses, ryegrasses, those do not grow well in heavy shade. So they're never going to thrive in that type of environment. So if you do have property, streams running through your property, and you have some heavy shade, you're going to need to consider some other plants besides our typical lawn grasses to help hold the banks in place. Next one, please, Becca. So we've touched on this. A buffer zone helps filter our runoff water. What we don't want to see happening is our soil going into the stream. Not only is it a factor of affecting the aquatic life health, but we don't want to lose our good topsoil. My degree in college was soils and crops, and so I'm a soils geek from way back. And we know that when we lose topsoil, that's something that has taken us hundreds of years, up to 1,000 years to create just 1 inch of topsoil. So it's an important resource, just like water, that we can't afford to waste. The buffer zone, a healthy functioning buffer zone, is going to capture and uptake nutrients. Those nutrients can be from fertilizer, they can be from manure, from animals, they can be from a malfunctioning septic system. So a buffer zone is going to help take care of those issues. And they also serve to intercept pesticide runoff. And this is a good time to remind everybody, the land bordering your streams or ponds, you don't want to be applying fertilizer all the way up to the edge of those. You want to leave a minimum of 10 feet, I would say 25 feet if possible. I know that every homeowner's yard is not going to allow for that. But on some of our other small acreages, the bigger, the wider buffer that you can leave between where you spray or where you fertilize and the water is going to help you improve your stream health. All right, Becca. So we've touched on this. A buffer zone is going to protect your stream banks from erosion. It slows down the water so it's not cutting out the banks. And when we have good vegetative roots, deep roots, they're going to help hold the soil in place as well. A buffer zone, the plants in it, it's also providing wildlife habitat. Another key point to think of is a good buffer zone is going to have some tall plants that actually provide shade to the water. You don't want the water scorching hot. You want it to have some shade to give good value of the habitat for the aquatic life, but also when you have sunlight heating the water directly, especially in shallower areas, that's when we see algae occurring in ponds and streams, and we get into conditions that are not healthy if it's glutting the water source. The vegetative production is also giving wildlife food sources, and it can also be shelter when you have trees along a water line for our birds like owls. They're pretty cool. So again, a buffer zone is going to reduce flood damage. Our floodplains are going to store flood water. and serve to provide a groundwater recharge at a later movement and slow water movement. And then to recap, a healthy buffer zone is one that has good cover, good plant cover. It's going to protect the stream or a pond bank from erosion and loss of soil. It's going to improve the water quality. It's going to improve wildlife habitat. Hopefully it's something that's pleasing to look at. And a lot of times this may increase the value of your property. I'll touch on the next slide a little more on that. So tying in with what I just said, a lot of times we think, okay, if we have any type of cover near our stream, then it's a buffer. But the grass that you see in this photo is an example of our lawn grass. And when we think about lawn grasses, the fescues, the ryegrasses, the bluegrasses, the root system of those plants is only going to be about 3 to 4 inches deep. And so it's not really doing a lot to hold soil in place. The other problem I see with this photo is that the landowner has mowed really, really close. So when you're trying to maintain a good stand of lawn grass, those cool season grasses that I mentioned, you want to never mow lower than 3 inches in general. If you repeatedly mow grass lower than that, what you are doing is reducing the plant's ability to capture sunlight from those leaf blades or on those leaf blades and store energy. And when photosynthesis is reduced, you also see a reduction in how much energy the plants can store in their roots. And that means they have less ability to survive from year to year. So what we see in a situation like this with very close mowing, whether it's your lawn or your pasture, is that over time, the grass thins out and erosion is more likely to occur. So compare that with native grasses, with trees, with native shrubs. They're going to have a more extensive root system that goes much further down than that 3 to 4 inch of our lawn grass. So that's something to think about. And whether you decide to quit mowing and allow native plants to move in over time on their own, or whether you create an intentional planting. A buffer zone should be made up of several combinations of types of plants. And if those can be native plants, that's even better. So I'm turning it over to Derek now.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Derek Shade. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. I'm a staff engineer within the Oldham County Engineering Department. And now that Tracy and Becca have provided you all some great information regarding importance of streams, stream anatomy, and buffer zones, the next part of the presentation is going to focus on steps to improve and maintain your stream. Next slide. So here are some steps that we're going to focus on to maintain a healthy stream. So the first thing we're going to look at is how to assess your stream to see if it's healthy. If it turns out that it's healthy, no actions may be needed by you to keep that going. However, if your stream is unhealthy, we're going to discuss some passive actions and some active actions that you may be able to take in order to improve the health of your stream. Now, a lot of these passive actions that we're going to talk about are generally low cost and low effort, which the majority of people really like to employ. And then we're also going to talk about a lot of active actions. Now, these active actions are going to range from low cost, low effort to high cost, high effort. So A lot of these actions will fit just about any budget or time that you may have. Next slide. Okay, so we've talked a lot about these facets already, these characteristics of an unhealthy stream. I'm just going to re-highlight some of them real quick. So, you know, as discussed by Tracy, the floodplain is an area on either side of the stream that the stream wants to expand into, you know, after a rain. The general characteristics that a stream will present itself with if it doesn't have good access to its floodplain is you're going to have stream banks that are vertical or nearly vertical, and you're going to be able to observe a lot of bare soils, stream bank erosion, and a lot of these banks will actually slough off or fall off into the stream. As Tracy also mentioned, you want a stream that meanders. You don't want a stream that is channelized, you know, straight or nearly straight. You know, the best way that I like to think about this is an analogy of a downhill skier. You know, when a skier goes down a hill, the skier goes back and forth across the slope. You know, it stays at a really nice slow pace and then doesn't have a lot of energy as he goes down the slope. Now, I guess you can quickly see what happens if that skier just points his skis directly downhill. He is going to pick up a significant amount of speed and energy. Well, stream water is exactly the same way. The negative effects of that stream going directly in a straight line is that it does the exact same thing. It will pick up velocity and it will increase the potential for erosion on the stream banks. So that's why we like to have a stream that meanders. So if you have a stream on your property that doesn't meander, you might want to think about trying to get it back into a meandering state. Tracy also mentioned buffer zones. Unhealthy streams generally do not have these buffer zones. So if you have a stream that there's no vegetation or trees or habitat, if your stream is being mowed right up to the edge, or you observe bare soils on your stream bank, you probably lack the buffer zone that we like to see. And then some other characteristics are, you know, reduced in-stream habitat, which could result in no or limited aquatic organisms. Next slide. So I think Becca has posted this and it's just a tool that we developed to help you assess your backyard stream. And as you can see, it has a lot of the categories that we just talked about. And it helps you through the use of red and green to identify what is not good versus what is good when you try to assess your backyard stream. Next slide. So we're going to use some of these concepts on some streams that I found in Oldham County and took a picture of so that you all can be aware of some of these characteristics we just discussed. So I'll try to go slow. I don't have a pointer available since Becca's controlling the presentation. So there we go. Thank you, Becca. So as you can see in this photo, both stream banks are vertical or nearly vertical. Now this really inhibits the stream from accessing the floodplain, which is on either side of those banks. You can also see that there are bare soils present on both stream banks and that mowing is occurring right up to the stream bank here. One last thing that you can see in this photo that we did not talk about is on the right bank, you can see a big strip of brown grass, which leads me to believe that this property owner is spraying weed and grass killer right up along the edge. This is a common occurrence throughout Oldham County, and it really worsens the health of your stream, and it allows for additional erosion to occur. Next slide. Okay, so now here's an example of a pretty healthy stream. Now I took this photo in the fall or winter, and so you don't see a lot of vegetation, but I know that the buffer here is present in the spring and summertime. So you have to just take my word on that. So as you can see here, we're going to go through some of the similar characteristics. So you can see here on these stream banks that they are not vertical. They are they're laid back. So so after a rain and additional water comes through, you can see that they have excellent access to the floodplain. And you can actually see in the upper right portion there, you can see a lot of the grasses that are laid over. That's probably from the water that is coming down the stream and is, after it rains and it floods and it's being able to move downstream. It's just pushing some of that vegetation over. You can see that there's no bare soils, and you can also see the remnants of the buffer zone, which is really great. Next slide. Okay, so here we have another example of an unhealthy stream. And as you can see here again, it's highlighted by stream banks that are nearly vertical. You can also see that there's bare soils present throughout the stream. Once again, there is no real buffer zone. There are a lot of trees present, which is great, for holding the soil, but there's no real buffer zone up to the edges. You can see it's being mowed right to the edge, and really could use the benefits of a buffer zone here. Next slide. Okay, so now that we can identify some of the characteristics of an unhealthy stream, let's talk a little bit about some of the actions that we can do to improve that stream. And Tracy gave you some great information on this already, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. But one of the best passive actions that you can take to improve your stream is to create a buffer zone or a no-mow zone. And just let plants that naturally establish there take root and grow. It's very easy, it's low maintenance, it's cheap. You can utilize existing seeds, and you can easily get rid of unwanted plants just by going in there and picking them out. Now, there is one important thing that you have to keep in mind, is that some homeowners associations may not approve this or find it acceptable for some properties. So definitely check in with your local ordinances or your HOA restrictions before you start to implement these buffer zones or no-mow zones. Some of these HOAs and counties may not approve of them because I'm sure we can all admit they look a little bit unkept in some instances, even though they do have significant benefits. Next slide. So the next two slides, I'm just going to show you some no-mow zones that have established themselves after one or more growing seasons. And this is a good example of one. Next slide. And here's an additional example of a no-mow zone or a buffer zone. Next slide. Okay, this is just another example of a passive action that you can take, and it's just to allow the stream to flood, meander, and habitat to develop naturally on its own. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about some of the active actions that you can take to improve your stream. Now, typically when we talk about active actions, these are things that are associated with more deliberate planning, plantings and maintaining of specific trees, shrubs, and grasses, within your buffer zone and within the stream area. Now, this deliberate planning usually requires 6 steps. You usually want to do a site assessment. You want to have a development plan for the plants you want to put in there, just to make sure that you're using native plants. You want to do some site preparation, select your plants, and then plant, and then protect and maintain them. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about these 6 steps, but a lot of the documents that Becca is providing online will go into a lot more detail how to accomplish this. So I encourage all of you to look at the literature provided. If you want more guidance and detail on how to go about these 6 steps. Next slide. Okay, so here's an example of a property owner that has done some deliberate planning. So as you can see here, the stream goes down the middle here, and it actually meanders in the 2 different directions. So it has not been channelized. It actually meanders very nicely. You can see that both the right and left side banks are not vertical. They're laid back at a very nice slope. So if any increase in stream water comes through, it can access its floodplain very easily. And you can see that there are a lot of native plants and trees within the buffer zone here that they have actively selected. And they've also added some mulching here to reduce the amount of bare soils present. So, you know, a good mulching will also reduce erosion from rain and things like that. So, like I said, just one great example of some deliberate planning and active actions. Next slide. Okay, so another thing that you can do is deliberate stream maintenance. A lot of times we get a lot of phone calls regarding logs in the stream and log jams and things like that. And we try to give some good direction as to how to actually conduct maintenance on these things. So you don't actually have to remove all of these logs and log jams. You can actually use it to your benefit. So you can arrange fallen logs to protect stream banks and clean up litter and things like that that are also in the stream. So I'll give you a couple examples. Next slide. Okay, so the benefit of logs. We have done a project, which I'm going to show you here in the next few slides, to help the stream by actually stabilizing the banks to prevent erosion. Setting these logs in various locations can also create pools and slow the flow of the stream in various areas. This will also create a lot of habitat for your aquatic species. Sorry, I'm getting some background noise there. I'm not sure if everybody's muted, but so just check your audio. And a lot of these logs will also allow nutrient, you know, it'll also benefit because it'll add nutrients, carbon and nitrogen into the stream. Next slide. Okay, so what about log jams? The first thing to do is to actually determine what the problem is. We get a lot of phone calls in Oldham County that people have log jams. Some of these log jams don't really pose a significant threat, but others actually might pose a significant threat because they can actually reroute the stream or redirect the stream into places that you really don't want them. So the first thing to do would just actually get in there and see what exactly is happening and how big the log jam is. If it is a log jam that you feel is redirecting the stream or creating the stream to flow where it naturally doesn't want to go, you may be able to do a one-step removal process, which means you don't need a permit to do that removal. I'm not going to go into a lot of the details regarding that one-step removal process, but I believe Becca has posted it in the literature section so that you can go through it after this presentation to get some more information on that. But in general, it's usually a one-step removal process is you have to have one point of entry for machinery. You can't remove the stream bank or stream bed material, and any material from that log jam should be deposited outside the flood zone. So as long as you're following some of those general requirements, no permit is required for doing that kind of maintenance. Next slide. So this slide is just going to show you how Oldham County had a project and how we just simply placed some of these logs to get some of these benefits for the stream. So here in this example, you can see that we've just placed some logs across the bank. And what this will do is it'll trap sediment. It'll also help protect the stream bank. It creates some habitat. and it'll also trap some nutrients and generate some nutrients for healthy aquatic environment. Next slide. Okay, and here's another example. You can see where we've placed logs in and around and behind some trees to help stabilize the bank. Next slide. And here is also a very good example of log placement and limb placement to stabilize a stream. And these things are very easy to do as long as the limb or the fallen tree is not, excessive in size. Next slide, please. Okay, so now these deliberate actions, these active actions, this is where the cost is going to range, depend on what you really want to do. So a lot of the things that are involved with this type of active stream improvement is usually engineered. So in this point, or at this stage, we're doing some deliberate grading, we're doing steam bank stabilization, and we may even be doing some stream rerouting. So when you're doing these type of things, you want to try to make sure that your stream banks are a 3-to-1 slope. And this basically means for every 1 foot high, you want to have 3 foot horizontal for your slope. Okay. You're going to be installing various erosion control measures, such as erosion control blankets to help reduce erosion. And you could be doing some soft or some hard engineering. Soft engineering is usually through the use of some type of organic or plant material, such as live stakes. And hard engineering is usually through the use of some type of riprap or gabion basket. Now, riprap is usually just larger stones, and your gabion baskets are generally large stones inside of a wire mesh to hold it all together. Next slide. So I'm just going to highlight a few examples of projects that we have done in Oldham County to show you some of this more active approach to obtaining a healthier stream. Now, this is one restoration project in Curry's Fork that was done. As you can see from this photo, this is the pre-photo. There was a tire wall in place, and this homeowner was trying to stabilize their stream bank with things that they had available to them. So let's look at this a little bit closer. Next slide. So in this first photo, you can see that we've removed the tire wall that was up on the steep embankment. We've removed some vegetation and some trees so that we have access to the heavy equipment to get in here. Next slide. And here you can see that we have eased some of the slopes back on the right. We've added some large rocks to the toe of the slope on the left. Now, adding these large rocks is going to help us to stabilize the bank, and it's also going to help minimize the amount of erosion. Next slide. So here you can see the next step. Now we've backfilled the slope on the left and then added some erosion control matting on both the left and the right to minimize the erosion and let all the native plant species and live stakes that we planted actually take root and stabilize. Next slide. And then this is after 1 month. You can see a lot of the vegetation is starting to pop green. Next slide. And this is actually after, I want to say, 2 to 3 growth seasons. You can see a lot of our live stakes have taken, a lot of the vegetation is coming in full, and the stream has really, stabilized itself and is really healthy right now. So this is a good success project that we had. Next slide.
Yeah, and this is 2 years later, just so everybody knows.
Thanks, Becca. So here's the same project, and this is just a little bit farther downstream. And as you can see, it's a lot of the same stuff that we just talked about. We removed a lot of the trees and vegetation so we could get our equipment in here. We eased the slopes on the left and right banks. We added some large rocks to the toe of the slope on the right. This is where the stream, when it comes in, is going to, hit the bank the hardest and want to, erode it out. So we've hardened it up with some large rocks, typically called riprap. Next slide. And then as you can see here, we've backfilled it with some dirt and things like that. We've added erosion control blankets, and this is about after a month of growth after about a month of growth. Becca, I don't know if there is a question, it's kind of pertinent. I don't know if you want to answer that. They're asking where the specific location of this project site is.
So this one, so they're both part of South Fork, Curry's Fork. The first project was off of Ballard Court, and this one is Clark's Point. That's off of West Moody. If you're driving on West Moody towards, I guess, Lakewood Valley Treatment Plant. It's on the left. There's like a little field as you go over the curve. And then there's a park there too.
Okay.
If that's not clear, just send me a message and I can send like a map or something. Happy to do that.
Okay. So then this is the same location after 2 years of growth, seasonal growth. So it's looking really great. Next slide. Okay, and this is the last one I'm going to review with you. This is another area where you can see the stream runs right alongside of a local road. And if you, next slide, you can see it's coming very close to the road. And it was creating a problem where we were starting to get concerned that it was going to undermine the road. So we really had to get in here and do something. Next slide. Okay, great. So here we are. You can see that, same as the other two sites, we got in here, removed a lot of the vegetation, eased the bank on the left side. We actually moved the stream a little bit away from the road here. So you can see we moved it from where it was right up close to the road to the left a little bit. We added, once again, rocks to the slope that was going to receive the most of the stream impact as it went through the turn. And then we backfilled it. Next slide. And here you can see, like I just mentioned, we backfilled it. We added some erosion control matting, and then planted grasses and some other vegetation. Next slide. Can you go next slide back? There you go. And there it is after about 2 seasons of growth. So you can see it's established really well, and it's looking great. Okay, next slide.
And this one is on East Moody Lane, right off of Highway 53. So probably pretty common road people drive on. I know we're a little after 10. I apologize for going long. That's my fault. We'll still have a few more minutes and then time for questions. If you do have to head out, I understand. If you haven't put your name in the chat, please do that. But we've got some more important information to share if you have the time.
Okay, next. Okay, great. So I know some of this can seem extremely overwhelming, what we're describing here today. So to help you, there are many resources to assist you if you want to undertake some of these passive or active restoration projects. So if you're really interested in doing something like this, I encourage you to reach out to us. You can get a hold of us through the Oldham County Engineering Department at Oldham County Fiscal Court. We can help with those items listed, which include storm sewer, stream assessments, drainage area assessments. We can give recommendations for corrective action, and we also have a 50/50 flood grant that you can use to assist with projects if you have stormwater runoff, entering your structures and things like that. You can get a hold of Becca. She's the Oldham County Curry's Fork Watershed Coordinator. She can also do stream assessments and recommend corrective action. And you can also get a hold of Tracy Misson at Oldham County Cooperative Extension Service. She also does stream assessments and recommends corrective actions as well. And then I believe Becca has a very comprehensive literature that she's providing you. Next slide. And it includes a lot of these resources that are going to give you a lot more detail if you read through these into the brief presentations that we've provided you here today.
And did you have anything else to add, Derek?
No, that's
I don't
about
wanna
it.
Cut you off. Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. So yeah, so as